Section 16 of Fantasy, Fairies and Ghosts by Various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Carasoyn, Chapter 12. The Wax and the Awl. The evening arrived. The sun was going down over the sea, cloudless, casting gold from him lavishly, when Colin arrived on the shore at some distance from his home. The tide was falling, and a good space of sand was uncovered and lay glittering in the setting sun. This sand lay between some rocks and the sea, and from the rocks innumerable runners of water that had been left behind in their hollows were hurrying back to their mother. These occasionally spread into little shallow lakes, resting in hollows in the sand. These lakes were in a constant ripple from the flow of the little streams through them, and the sun shining on these multitudinous ripples, the sand at the bottom shone like brown silk, watered with gold. Only that the golden lines were flitting about like living things, never for a moment in one place. Now Colin had no need of fairy ointment to anoint his eyes and make him able to see fairies. Most people need this, but Colin was naturally gifted. Therefore, as he drew near a certain high rock, which he knew very well, and from which many streams were flowing back into the sea, he saw that the little lakes about it were crowded with fairies, playing all kinds of pranks in the water. It was a lovely sight to see them thus frolicking in the light of the setting sun, in their gay dresses, sparkling with jewels, or what looked like jewels, flashing all colours as they moved. But Colin had not much time to see them, for the moment they saw him, knowing that this was the man whom they had wronged by stealing his child, and knowing too that he saw them, they fled at once up the high rock and vanished. This was just what Colin wanted. He went all round and round the rock, looked in every direction in which there might be a pool, found more fairies here and there, who fled like the first up the rock and disappeared. When he had thus driven them all from the sands, he approached the rock, taking the lump of cobbler's wax from his pocket as he went. He scrambled up the rock, and without showing his face, put his hand on the uppermost edge of it, and began drawing a line with the wax all along. He went creeping round the rock, still drawing the wax along the edge, till he had completed the circuit. Then he peeped over. Now in the heart of this rock, which was nearly covered at high water, there was a big basin known as the Kelpie's Pool, filled with sea water and the loveliest seaweed and many little sea animals, and this was a favourite resort of the fairies. It was now, of course, crowded. When they saw his big head come peeping over, they burst into a loud fit of laughter, and began mocking him and making game of him in 100 ways. Some made the ugliest faces they could, some queer gestures of contempt, others sung bits of songs, and so on, while the Queen sat by herself on a projecting corner of the rock, with her feet in the water, and looked at him sulkily. Many of them kept on plunging and swimming and diving and floating while they mocked him, and Colin would have enjoyed the sight much if they had not spoiled their beauty and their motions by their grimaces and their gestures. "I want my child," said Colin. "Give him his child," cried one. Thereupon a dozen of them dived, and brought up a huge sea slug, a horrid creature like the lump of blubber, and held it up to him, saying, "There he is, come down and fetch him." Others offered him a blue lobster, struggling in their grasp, others a spider crab, others a whelk, while some of them sung mocking verses, each capping the line the other gave. At length they lifted a dreadful object from the bottom. It was like a baby with his face half eaten away by the fishes, only that he had a huge nose like the big toe of a lobster. But Colin was not to be taken in. "Very well, good people," he said, "I will try something else." He crept down the rock again, took out the little cobbler's awl, and began boring a hole. It went through the rock as if it had been butter, and as he drew it out the water followed in a far-reaching spout. He bored another, and went on boring till there were 313 spouts gushing from the rock, and running away in a strong little stream towards the sea. He then sat down on a ledge at the foot of the rock and waited. By and by he heard a clamour of little voices from the basin. They had found that the water was getting very low, but when they discovered the holes by which it was escaping, "He's got Dottlecob's awl! He's got Dottlecob's awl!" they cried with one voice of horror. When he heard this, Colin climbed the rock again to enjoy their confusion. But here I must explain a little. In the former part of this history I showed how fond these fairies were of water, but the fact was they were far too fond of it. It had grown a thorough dissipation with them. Their business had been chiefly to tend and help the flowers in which they lived, and to do good offices for everything that had any kind of life about them. Hence their name of good people. But from finding the good the water did to the flowers, and from sharing in the refreshment it brought them, flowing up to them in tiny runners through the veins of the plants, they had fallen in love with the water itself, for its own sake, or rather for the pleasure it gave to them, irrespective of the good it was to the flowers which lived upon it. So they neglected their business, and took to sailing on the streams and plunging into every pool they could find. Hence the rapidity of their decline and fall. Again, on coming to the sea-coast, they had found that the salt water did much to restore the beauty they had lost by partaking of the Carasoyn. Therefore they were constantly on the shore, bathing for ever in the water, especially that left in this pool by the ebbing tide, which was particularly to their taste, till at last they had grown entirely dependent for comfort on the sea-water, and, they thought, entirely dependent on it for existence also, at least such existence as was in the least worth possessing. Therefore, when they saw the big face of Colin peering once more over the ledge, they rushed at him in a rage, scrambling up the side of the rock like so many mad beetles. Colin drew back and let them come on. The moment the foremost put his foot on the line that Colin had drawn around the rock, he slipped and tumbled backwards, head over heels into the pool, shrieking, "He's got Dottlecob's wax! He's got Dottlecob's wax!" screamed the next, as he fell backwards after his companion, and this took place till no one would approach the line. In fact, no fairy could keep his footing on the wax, and the line was so broad, for as Colin rubbed it, it had melted and spread that not one of them could spring over it. The Queen now rose. "What do you want, Colin?" she said. "I want my child, as you know very well," answered Colin. "Come and take him," returned the Queen, and sat down again, not now with her feet in the water, for it was much too low for that. But Colin knew better. He sat down on the edge of the basin. Unfortunately, the tail of his coat crossed the line. In a moment half a dozen of the fairies were out of the circle. Colin rose instantly, and there was not much harm done, for the multitude was still in prison. The water was nearly gone, beginning to leave the very roots of the long tangles uncovered. At length the Queen could bear it no longer. "Look here, Colin," she said, I wish you well." And as she spoke she rose and descended the side of the rock towards the water, now far below her. She had to be very cautious too, the stones were so slippery, though there was none of Dottlecob's wax there. About half-way below where the surface of the pool had been, she stopped and pushed a stone aside. Colin saw what seemed the entrance to a cave inside the rock. The Queen went in. A few moments after she came out wringing her hands. "Oh dear, what shall I do?" she cried. "You horrid, thick people will grow so. He's grown to such a size that I can't get him out." "Will you let him go if I get him out?" asked Colin. I will. We shall all be starved to death for want of sea water if I don't," she answered. "Swear by the cobbler's awl and the cobbler's wax," said Colin. "I swear," said the Queen. "By the cobbler's awl and the cobbler's wax," insisted Colin. "I swear by the cobbler's awl and the cobbler's wax," returned the Queen. "In the name of your people?" "In the name of my people," said the Queen, "that none of us here present will ever annoy you or your family hereafter." "Then I'll come down," said Colin, and jumped into the basin. With the cobbler's awl he soon cleared a big opening into the rock, for it bored and cut it like butter. Then out crept a beautiful boy of about 10 years old into his father's arms, with eyes and ears and chin and cheek all safe and sound, and he carried him home to his mother. It was a disappointment to find him so much of a baby at his age, but that fault soon began to mend, and the house was full of jubilation, and little Colin told them the whole story of his sojourn among the fairies. And it did not take so long as you would think, for he fancied he had been there only about a week. End of section 16.